When it became known that Vladimir Putin was heading to India on an official visit, many perceived this news as yet another diplomatic gesture used by the Kremlin to demonstrate its independent foreign policy. Why did Putin fly there? And what are the goals and consequences of the visit? Let's take a closer look. As is well known, more than 20,000 sanctions have been imposed on Russia, including on the main types of raw materials, gas and oil. India, as one of Russia's main oil buyers, benefits from the low price at which it sells it. At first glance, it may seem that this is a meeting between two friends and partners who want to settle prices. But wait, it's not that simple. Russia is going through one of the most vulnerable periods in its modern history, and for Putin, every meeting with a major power is not a political ritual, but an attempt to find support in the face of rapidly shrinking room for maneuver. On the surface, it looks like normal state cooperation, strategic dialogue, economic agreements, discussions on security and regional stability. But the real purpose of the Kremlin's visit to India revolves around several key factors. This weakening of China's influence on Russia, the crisis in the Russian economy, the fall of the ruble, the budget deficit, reduction of military resources, loss of control over major export destinations, and the need to secure access to international markets and technologies that have become unavailable due to sanctions. The main motive that literally forced Putin to board a plane and fly to New Delhi was Russia's growing dependence on China. After Europe and the West withdrew from the market for Russian energy resources, Moscow found itself completely tied to Beijing, which is exploiting this situation with cold pragmatism. Chinese banks are blocking transfers, insurance companies are refusing to insure Russian tankers, and China is effectively dictating the price of Russian oil unilaterally, demanding discounts that are pushing the Russian budget to the brink of profitability. For Putin, this dependence is becoming not just inconvenient, but strategically dangerous. China is turning Russia into a junior partner, weakening its political influence and depriving it of independence. This is precisely why India is viewed by the Kremlin as an alternative center of power that could balance China's growing dominance. But here a second, equally important motive arises: oil. Russia has lost the European market. India has become the largest buyer of Russian oil, providing the lion's share of foreign currency revenues to the Russian budget. However, the US and its allies are beginning to put pressure on India, demanding that it reduce imports of Russian oil and introduce additional trade restrictions. I have a detailed video on my channel. Here's a hint. For Moscow, this is a deadly scenario. Any move by India to reduce purchases could collapse budget revenues, defense spending, and the entire system of state support for the military economy. Putin is traveling to India not for diplomatic smiles, but to literally keep the country from turning away. The military issue is another important reason for the visit. Russia is experiencing an acute shortage of components, electronics, high-precision instruments, optical systems, and equipment for the military industry. North Korea is no longer able to provide the volume. Iran is under external pressure. China is trying to distance itself from operations that could lead to additional sanctions. India, meanwhile, occupies a unique position. It has been cooperating with Russia in the defense sector for decades, purchasing Russian weapons and modernizing old systems, while maintaining relations with the US. This makes India an ideal partner for gray supply chains and technological circumvention of sanctions. The Russian budget is bursting at the seams. War expenses are rising, revenues are falling, and the banking system is experiencing the most serious pressure in the last 20 years. In this situation, Moscow is counting on joint projects, investments, currency agreements, alternative settlement mechanisms, and access to Indian financial institutions, which are not yet subject to the same level of sanctions as Chinese or Turkish banks. However, the political dimension should not be forgotten. It is extremely important for Putin to show domestically that he is not isolated, that he has allies, and that he is still accepted by world leaders. The visit to India is primarily an attempt to create an image of normality, stable diplomacy, and multipolarity in which Russia still plays a role. The Kremlin understands perfectly well that any foreign meetings are a tool for domestic propaganda. Therefore, the very fact that Putin flew in is already becoming a major event, regardless of the actual agreements. At the same time, India is not Russia's ally in the political sense. It acts solely in its own interests. India uses Russia as a source of cheap oil, as a means of putting pressure on China, and as a supplier of weapons that can be purchased cheaper than American ones. But if India feels threatened by too close a relationship with the Kremlin, it will easily reconsider its position. That is why Putin is traveling to India in the position of a supplicant, and this is the main change that shows the weakness of Russia's current foreign policy. Thus, Putin's visit to India is not a gesture of strength, but a gesture of necessity. Russia is losing its economic leverage, partnerships, financial stability, and diplomatic maneuverability. Moscow no longer dictates terms as it once did, and is now forced to seek support from those who are willing to listen, but not willing to sacrifice their interests for the Kremlin. India has become the last major player still willing to open its doors, but it does so exclusively on its own terms. Ultimately, this visit reveals a fundamental truth. With each passing month, Russia finds itself increasingly isolated, and its leader increasingly dependent on external actors. Putin is trying to stay in the global game, but his every move is becoming more reactive and less strategic. It is not China, the Middle East, or Africa. It is India that is now becoming the mirror in which the Russian authorities see how narrow their room for maneuver has become.